Good morning, lacrosse community. My name's Ryan Berns. I'm the founder of Lacrosse Leadership Institute. It's our mission to empower all those that love lacrosse, to identify the skills that you gain from the game and use it in the real world so that you can live the life of your dreams. I'm so excited for our guest today. Casey Connor came to the Valley a few years ago to coach Arizona State University, and he's been a huge impact in the area. He's got a resume that's so extensive. I'm excited for him to be able to share it with all of us. So without further ado, Casey, please give us a little bit of background on how you got in lacrosse in the first place and where your journey's taking you to today.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Ryan. It's, we've been watching the Leadership Institute, and it's a fantastic place, I think, for people to get a perspective and background on kind of where people have come from and the different views they have on the sport and the growth, specifically as we talk about, here in Arizona and the Valley of how the game is morphing. But for me, background-wise, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, was actually a pretty diehard soccer player as a young age and played baseball growing up till, I don't know, maybe about, I say growing up, but till about the age of 8. And I hated it. Mom said, that's fine, but you got to pick something else to play in the spring. So it was soccer in the fall, and I figured I'd try out lacrosse. And I was a pretty tall, athletic kid, not very strong at that age, but taller. So it was like, hey, here's a stick, go play defense. And I kind of stuck through that all through rec league. And rec league in Baltimore back then was that was the pinnacle of how lacrosse was operated. Clubs didn't exist, and camps were just fun to go to. So rec was very competitive, and guys today, even my age or even older and younger, will tell you where they played their rec ball. And it's cool to share stories that way. So as time progressed, my 8th grade year, one of my best friends who I still talk with today, he was a defender, I was a midfielder. Halfway through the season, we switched spots. He says, here, you take my pole, I'll take your shorty. And I kind of fell in love with that defensive position then, and went to high school the following fall and decided I was going to try out for soccer in the fall, and then lacrosse in the spring. And I was going to try out as a defenseman for lacrosse. And that was kind of the turning point. It's a story I share more so for kids that are still figuring out what position they are, and that it's never too late to kind of transition or try a new spot. And granted, the coach asked me to do that, but I fell in love with it. And I never would have thought that I would have fallen in love with that defensive position. So that was really cool. Tried out in high school and had a great experience. And my freshman year started realizing how big of a sport lacrosse was in the Baltimore area comparative to the country. And so realized real quick, hey, if I'm a okay soccer player here, I'm probably still an okay soccer player on a national level. And if I want to play in college, whereas lacrosse, I found out, hey, if I'm a pretty good player here, I'm probably a pretty good player in the nation, or comparative to what's out there and who's competing for college scholarships. So I attended Calvert Hall High School, which was an all boys prep school. They've had tons of success over the years. Weren't quite on that level when I played there. And in fact, the current head coach there was my JV coach my freshman year. And then he took over the varsity team my senior year. So I was, Brian Kelly was his name, we call him BK. I was BK's first senior class. He was only 27 or 28 years old. Really had a connection to him, and he was a defenseman at North Carolina. And he taught fundamentals like nobody's business. And Brian's not a tall guy, but he just knew how to play the position. And so I kind of really embraced that. He helped me then from there into my position at University of Maryland. It was a school that was right around the corner, very well known for defensemen and defensive players. And it was just something that I thought appealed to me. I wasn't really big on their recruiting radar. But then again, we were all going through that process our senior year for the most part. I ended up making the decision to attend the school, I think April or May of my senior season. So it's just, that's how the kind of cards fell back then. I went on to the University of Maryland, and, I think my background in the private school league in Baltimore called the MIAA, a very IQ prepared league that gets you ready for college. And so every kid that comes out of there usually has a great head on their shoulders, pretty solid stick. And that's exactly what I brought to the table. We had a senior that got injured, and so I stepped into a starting role my freshman year. And then from there on, I enjoyed my experience. I played for a guy named Dick Adele at the University of Maryland, affectionately known as Big Man. He was about 6'5", two something. I mean, just big frame. But Big Man was a motivator. His assistant coaches at the time were Scotty Marr, who's now the head coach at Albany, and then a guy named Dave Slavkowski, who was his defensive coordinator with him, all from Army and on to Maryland. And he let, Slav and Scotty run their ends of the field. Big Man was a very motivational guy. He would look at you, he'd challenge you, and you would run through the wall for him. He passed away a couple years ago after fighting a musculoskeletal syndrome that, obviously took him sooner than we hoped to. But, the funeral for Big Man and just the memories that everybody shared, whether they played for him at Army or at Baltimore Community College or Calvert Hall. He was a coach there for a little while. I mean, it was crazy to hear these stories, but they were all the same. And I take away a lot of what both BK at Calvert Hall and Big Man at Maryland have taught me and kind of impressed upon me, building relationships, playing a certain kind of blue collar, fundamentally sound style of lacrosse, especially on the defensive end, which I'm familiar with. And I've just kind of carried that, and it still carries with me today to life lessons. So after Maryland, I got drafted into the MLL. I played 2 years with the Rochester Rattlers, 6 years with the Bayhawks, and had a great career there. Again, building relationships, watched the game grow. The first year I played was the first year of the league. So we really got to see a lot of great things happen. I also played 2 years with the NLL. It was called the Washington Power at the time, who's now the Colorado Mammoth. So a very successful franchise. And I love the box side of it too. The box side of lacrosse I'd never been exposed to, never played up until that year. That was fun. Really showed me a lot of nuances that I never would have envisioned. I think my stick got a heck of a lot better. I get Josh now because I only scored 1 goal in college, and it was like our last regular season game. The guys yell at me and laughed on me. And then I got to the MLL, and I was a 2-point guy with my short stick, with my long stick. I loved and just had a better feel for it. I thought the NLL side, the box side, really pulled that out. Fast forward to now, and me being a coach, I think from this day, as I look back, I was a 5th year at Maryland after I finished playing, and I was an undergrad assistant. That really piqued my interest into pursuing coaching, or just it showed me that I had kind of that coaching knack, which I think if you're a coach and you have it in you, it doesn't go away. And so I've always wanted to help, and I helped out at Calvert Hall for many years. I've coached club. I've done worn a lot of different hats, and on the girls' side as well, as my wife, who was a college lacrosse player and college coach as well. I've helped her out. I've always enjoyed that aspect of the game and as a way to give back. And so to this day, that's kind of what brought my family and I out to the Valley. My wife started the women's lacrosse program at Arizona State, and we've been influxed with just the love out here of the sport and just the rawness of it, the ability to maybe help it grow. And then from there, I kind of got entangled into a position at Arizona State myself, where I had seen the program from afar because Chris Malone, who had coached the team for many years, was a college teammate of mine. So I'd known about the program. And when they were looking for a new coach a couple years ago, they reached out, and it was just very appealing at the time. I think timing's a lot about everything in life, and it was fantastic. So now I get a chance to kind of continue on coaching at that kind of young man level, as I call it, and I really enjoyed my time at Calvert Hall, working with guys like Garrett Uppel, who plays in the PLL, Ryan Brown, guys that I watched these kids kind of matriculate into college and then beyond, and I've always had a passion for a lot of different levels, especially that one. So this Arizona State opportunity came up, and it just was something that I think made a lot of sense for the program and myself as well. So without going on and on and on, a big mouthful there's kind of a little bit of an intro and background on where I came from.
Well, Casey, your foundation is so strong when it comes down to lacrosse, and you can feel the different coaches that impacted your lives from BK to Big Man. And now you're passing on those legacies to so many right now. And it's so awesome to see. throughout this journey so far, what are some of the peaks or pinnacles that you've gone through that really stand out?
Yeah, I would say my time, gosh, when I started coaching at Calvert Hall, it was 2011, and I had transitioned jobs into one basically working from home, and now I had the ability to help out at Calvert Hall. I couldn't before because of the hours, and I'd always just thought for me to make an impression on those same guys, because Brian made that same impression on me. There's a guy that's there now named Tori Casemeyer, who is like a shooting guru. Helped actually groom Deemer Class, Ryan Brown, and those guys. He was an assistant for many years at Calvert Hall, and I got to watch how these guys just made such an impact on players and myself included. So the opportunity I was given in 2011 to really help out at Calvert Hall was fantastic. And I think for me, again, that kind of launched me into more of that. How can I continue to embrace the give back model, just the passion that I have, I think, as a player and coach, to continue to do that. And it was funny, that first year, it started out like 2 days a week. Brian was like, hey, can you come out on Wednesdays and Saturdays? We always played Tuesday, Friday games. So he's like, if I can get you the day after a game just to work individually with our defensemen, that would be awesome. 2 days turn into 3 days a week, 3 days turn into 4 days a week, so on and so forth. So it was, we always made as much as we could as assistants. We had a ton of assistants. I think we usually carry anywhere from 8 to 10 at Calvert Hall. And Dave Huntley was one of those assistants as well. And Dave Huntley coached me in the pro leagues for a couple of years. So I got to know him prior to his time at Calvert Hall. And just all these guys. And so I think from a standpoint of like peaks and valleys, just that time of my life and really understanding how I would say a higher level of lacrosse is coached and how the impact of these guys made on players was huge for me. I've always helped my wife out coaching. She started coaching right out of college. We were graduates in May of 2001, and she had a head coaching job at Mount St. Mary's in September 2001. And so all of a sudden she had a part-time assistant that was there taking grad classes, and that's it. That's all they had at the time. So all of a sudden, newly married couple, and we didn't have kids, dogs, anything. I became an instant volunteer coach for women's lacrosse. And that was really for me, and that's not necessarily a moment, but just a turning point where I got exposed to a different side of lacrosse with much different rules, as you know. And I think both of those helped me understand the other side of the ball a little bit better, right? So I can bring some of what I've learned to the girls to guys and vice versa, guys to girls. So not necessarily a moment right there, but certainly something that for me, I think defined kind of where I'm at. Peaks and valleys moments. Gosh, we won an ACC championship in '98 at Virginia in the rain, and we had just a great team that year. That was fantastic. Playing in front of 35,000 people. I mean, Bird Stadium, which was our home stadium, now it's just called Maryland Stadium. We played in the national championship my freshman and sophomore year, and it was 35,000 people. That was the last time. I think Rutgers was my senior year, so say 2000. That was like the last couple runs before they moved into M&T Bank Stadium or the Link or football stadiums, because they needed to. They just drew that many fans, so it was great playing in front of that many people. That's just win or lose. That was experience. One of my favorite games, we played Syracuse in '97, my freshman year, in the semifinals, and we didn't belong there. We had kind of upset Virginia the weekend before. And, this was Casey Powell, Ryan Powell, run and gun versus, our methodical offense with a stingy defense. It was who's going to win out. If it's a low scoring game, maybe Maryland has a chance. If it's a high scoring game, Syracuse will run the doors off. We won 18-17 in a game that just went back and forth and was indicative of that time too. You could always count on Virginia, Syracuse, first game of the year, usually either up at Syracuse at the Dome or down in Virginia at Klockner Stadium, and it was going to be a 17-16 game, period. And that's just the style of lacrosse back then, prior to slowing it down a little bit and getting into methodical offenses and then the advent of the shot clock. Those for me, I think, are always kind of cool moments as I look back as a player. I won a championship in the MLL with the Bayhawks. That's, certainly a highlight as well. But these are all, it's just great memories to share. And even to this day, we talk with guys that you either played with in college or even high school, and you share stories. You share stories and you share memories.
Those stories and relationships that we build in lacrosse are something that you don't necessarily realize at the time that you're getting out of it. The same thing as the other skills. And a big part of this conversation is around leadership. So Casey, I'd like to ask you, what does leadership mean to you?
Yeah, so I reflect back on that 5th year I coached, and I was voted a captain the year before as a senior, and quite frankly, our coaches would tell you, hey, you were a captain your junior year. We always had seniors as captains. That's just how it worked. But being voted as a captain, I think to this day, even with all the the wins or the losses or the accolades, that's probably one of my most proudest moments, is to be nominated as a captain by my peers. And so, I look at, well, how did I get to that spot, and why did they look at me as a leader for their team? And so then the following year, I'm an undergrad assistant, and I got to sit in the locker room now before practice, after practice, with our coaches, the ones that I've been listening to and following for 4 years, and hearing kind of just how they were going to attack a specific player on our team to get X, Y, and Z out of him, or how can we show him the way, or, hey, we're struggling here with this group. What do we do? And so there were so many, I think, just kind of tricks and trades that I would have never known if I hadn't been exposed to that, to be a leader, that I was shown during that time. And then I fast forward to, again, my time at Calvert Hall, sitting in the locker room after a practice, talking about, gosh, we really need, this guy to step up, or, this person and this guy, they need to click. It's like, how did coaches get that out of players? What did they do other than a drill that I played in? I think for me, being able as a coach to untap or expose somebody to something that they maybe never thought they could do is the absolute definition of what leadership should look like. Something that we've tried to bring here to Arizona, with the girls that I work with out here, with the guys that I work with out here. How do we really expose these people to whether they think they're a leader or not? Because they're going to need it after they get out of college, right? They're going to be in a job. They're going to be in a position where there's either competition or they need to step up. How does this, 4 or 5 years of you working with them really mold into preparing them for something later in life?
And that's so cool to think of. We don't know, first of all, what we don't know.
Yeah.
A coach has an idea of what is possible, but they have to expose the player, the teammate, the partners to that idea. And most of the time, we have to learn that for ourselves. So it's a tricky way to lead and allow them to find it on their own, and then actually be empowered for that greatness. In order to do that, Casey, what are some of your goals, or how do you make that happen?
Yeah, I think part of it, and again, this is where I really credit working with my wife. I immediately, that first year helping her in college, was like in the fall, hollering at, this girl, hollering at that girl, on many times screaming at them like, hey, what? They didn't respond. And, I found that out pretty quickly. And some of them did, but on, girls lacrosse were a little different. You had to kind of cater. And what it really opened myself up to was, you've got to understand exactly your client, right? For lack of better terms, and not one, the whole one size fits all model never works. I learned that when I started having kids. My discipline, kind of program for one kid doesn't work for the other kid. Or how do you get this kid to do what you want them to do by your words and your actions, and then try and do something different for somebody that needs something different. So I think, when we talk about like, how do we develop the leadership, the biggest and first and most important thing is understanding the player you're trying to invoke into that leadership role, or just make good decisions, whatever it may be. Understand what works for them. And that's hard, and that's where I think my time at Calvert Hall, my time here at Arizona State, has been building relationships, build relationships with kid. We have a couple guys on the team that I can think of right off the top of my head where I'm like, their first year was a struggle with us, either in their personal life or in the classroom or even on the field. And they've made great strides. And it's, you got to stick with it as a coach, as a leader, as a mentor. You got to stick with that to just try to continue to fight the good fight. And hopefully there's a switch that flips, and it's very rewarding. At the end of the day, that's what coaches coach. They want to see not just on the field, but in different facets. And that's why we do what we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much that gives back to you as well for allowing others to accomplish what they want to. And with your position as the head coach of ASU and your daughter just committing to a Division I school, which is a huge accomplishment in itself, can you share with the followers that we have that are middle school, high school, or looking to play at the next level? What are you looking for? What are other coaches looking for? What can they do to play at that next level as well?
Yeah, sure. So, as we go on and on about the recruiting process, and at the end of the day, whatever age coaches are allowed to look at, or whatever age they're really starting to gravitate to for recruiting, and each sport's a little different as well. We've had a lot of rule changes in lacrosse that's slowed the process down, but it's also then sped it up for the time that it happens for those kids. 9-1 of their junior year, to be specific, for like Division I athletes. Our biggest message to players, and I say this as a dad who helped a girl go through it, as a club director, because we run a boys and a girls side where we're helping student athletes go through that process, and then one that also sits on the other side of recruiting those kids. We tell kids to make sure that you embrace it and take ownership of the process yourself. Every kid that's being contacted by a college coach is in high school. So even if they're young freshmen and starting that process, they're still in high school. You've got to own it. If you think mom and dad are going to hold your hand, they will, but that's not going to help you long term. And a lot of coaches, college coaches, can kind of see through that too, right? I can tell if an email is written by a parent. I can also tell, like, hey, how much independence does this child have, and how's that going to work out when they're 3,000 miles away, 2,000 miles away from home by themselves without mom and dad. So you have to be able to understand that you have to take the accountability yourself and the ownership of the process. The process is not going to go how you want it. No matter how pleasant you think it might go, you're going to have peaks and valleys, and it is what it is. And so you have to enjoy the ride, enjoy the process, and just continue to be steadfast in what you're trying to do. Communicate with coaches, right? So there's lots of recruiting platforms out there that can help you do that and help you track it and help you manage your connections. But if you're making highlights on your own through iMovie or another app, or you're just tracking emails through your Apple, mail client or whatever have you, or you're using a recruiting service, you still need to be active. And coaches want to see that you're interested. So my wife loves sharing a story, and I think if you get her on here one day, she'll tell it about a girl that just constantly was emailing her, and she's like, man, this girl's out of my league. But she thought the girl was so interested because she just continued to email, on a good basis, not over the top, but just continued to be, present at the front of, again, the constant communication and the recruiting process. So we ask kids, make sure that your communication, you're providing a story, you're sharing information, and you let them know the interest there. And the last big thing that we always tell recruits, and I know as smart as a college coach, cast a big net. Cast a big net of schools that you want to go after, whether you think it's a school for you or not. Don't eliminate it. Only eliminate it unless you actually have to eliminate it. If you can't eliminate a school because and by saying you don't like their program, or some of those real menial reasons of why you might eliminate, don't do that, right? Make sure your net's nice and wide, because you will take the net and eventually it'll keep filter down. And then that's where you have, the handful of schools that are right for you. And that's the process.
Casey, thank you so much for breaking down that process. That's so huge for so many people that don't necessarily understand it. It's so valuable to be able to hear your insight because of all the exposure that you have to the game, being on both sides of it as well.
Sure.
Probably three sides when we say you're the parent as well. So there's so much value there. And I think the big takeaways are that over communication and accountability, and those relate to life as a whole, especially when you're playing at that next level. You have to be able to communicate with coaches, be able to time manage, be able to be accountable for yourself.
Yes.
Right now, Casey, what are some of your personal goals, or what are you focusing on right now?
Well, COVID's a big challenge, right? So, I think, in particular, when it comes to recruiting, for me, it's a lot of film work, more than it's ever been. I'm still blessed that I can travel to some events, and there's still some events going on for us as a school to recruit and to be seen in front of kids. But by and large, for the most part, for all of college athletics, there's coaches that can't go and watch it right now. So, that for us personally has been a challenge on the recruiting standpoint, as well as helping our kids that are being recruited. So film, when we talk about what are the successful things that you need to be taking the steps on. Got to have quality film and plenty of it if you can. So, and for me, I want to watch film as much as I can right now, because it's as best as I can do, given COVID. And that's the same thing that we stress for any of our kids that go through our, the process for recruiting with us right now. And then, personally with the teams I'm working with, ASU in particular, it's how do we stay motivated? How do we stay engaged during this downtime? We haven't been able to hit the field yet, and some schools can, some schools can't. We want to make sure that our guys are prepared for that whenever we are allowed to hit the field, whenever we are allowed to scrimmage, whenever we are allowed to play our first game, we're as prepared as best we can. So we do a lot of team Zooms. We talk a lot about film and breakdowns. We're trying to make sure that our freshmen are up to speed, so that when we get on the field, there's not a big learning curve for them. They mentally know it up top. And even with our youth kids, youth sports been able to go on for a little while, here and there, depending on what state you're in. So continue to take advantage of the time that we are allowed to be on the field for some of those guys, right? And because you never know, all of a sudden we get shut down again, or all of a sudden, things just change for us, or you have someone in your program test positive and you got to shut down for 14 days. Are we taking advantage of the time that we have? So personal goals, I'm watching a lot of film for recruits. I'm making sure that our teams are staying engaged. And then I'm also, reading some John Gordon books, or finding some of the, not downtime, but like the change in kind of how we operate to, grow personally as a leader.
Well, Casey, that's so great that we're up to so many different things and growing as a leader and helping the teams, doing so much. Is there anything that we can do to partner with you and help in these missions and goals?
Spread the word. Continue to do this. I mean, this right here is just, again, another touch point for people to get a perspective. Somebody asked me the other day, I forget who it was, but the Leadership Institute came up, and I said, yeah, this is the goal here. The goal here is to provide some perspective, provide background from a lot of different people and how they've kind of come to where they are, and what looks ahead. So I think the more stories people can hear, the better equipped they are to embrace the sport and embrace kind of growth. So just keep doing this, man. Just keep growing the game.
Awesome, Casey. Well, thank you so much for your time. I so much appreciate it. I know there's so many families that appreciate you and all that you've done for the sport and will do. So thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Bernsey. Thanks for having me.